the best part of this season, really the key feature of this season, one of the reasons why it's not my favorite, because we talked about last season being my favorite, the port season. This is a close second. And sometimes in the years that I've lived and watched the show, it was my first favorite. Hamsterdam.
Oh, Hamsterdam.
Drug legalization. I didn't legalize drugs, Jesse.
That's
I
right.
just elected not to enforce the rules.
Exactly.
In order to keep the murder rate down in the Western District, Major Bunny Colvin, Rope Bunny Colvin, he identifies 3 vacant apartment areas, 3 vacant blocks of vacant homes, and says these are designated drug areas. You can deal drugs as long as there's no violence. And they proceed to do so over the course of season 3. And what do you know? The murder rate drops.
Mm-hmm.
Go figure.
Right.
But at what cost, Jesse? At what cost?
All right. Yeah. I think that is probably why this sticks out as my favorite so far. And I should say so far, because I haven't had a chance to finish season 4 yet. So, that's still on the plate. But this experiment that Major Colvin does is extremely interesting. And it's great to watch it unfold, not only with the politics side of things, but with the effect that it has on the communities as well. And then you get to watch like what seems to be a great turnaround. Hey, crime's dropped, but then you go into Hamsterdam and you start looking around and you start seeing some of the stuff. He's friends. Is it a deacon or he's friends with somebody in the church? And
some sort of high church. Yeah. By the way,
right.
Did you know that that's like an actual drug dealer? Like, have you listened to the podcast or watched any of the documentaries where they talk about how they use locals?
I do know they use locals, but I didn't know that the preacher or
he's
the church
like
guy.
He's an ex-drug dealer, which is hilarious.
Oh wow! Well,
I tell you what. I mean, of all the extras, he does a great job. Of all the real life people that they use in The Wire for this and that role, I was convinced he was a real actor. He's
right.
Excellent.
So did I. I had no idea. But yeah, his confidant in the church as he's as Colvin's talking to him and saying, yeah, this is actually working. This is working for me. He's like, well, let's go take a look. And he goes down there. He's like, okay, well,
what the hell did you do here, Bunny?
Yeah. What are you, where's the electricity? Where's the running water? And he's got a great point. Like you've brought all these people to one spot. They stay in this one spot. And not only that, like watching the effect of what he is doing on the drug operations themselves. Like there's no need for runners anymore.
Right.
There's no need for, that all starts to trickle down where there's just kids hanging around, not going to school and just screwing around because they don't have anything to do.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because the season opens with Carver. Carver left Daniel's squad after him and Herc felt like, as they put it, like they were their mules. They're like, we're going to go to the Western, and they're in the Western drug enforcement unit. And so it opens with them, in this big ass operation where they're using all these cars and a helicopter to grab a 9-year-old kid as he runs with drugs.
Right.
That was the big operation. And Colvin even says that to him. He was like, you use like half my resources for what? Like what charge you have on them? It's just, what was it Herc said? Like being an asshole in a public area.
Yeah.
But it's meant to illustrate the futility of drug enforcement, that there's a lot of expenditure. There's a lot of expenditure for not a lot of gain. The juice isn't worth the squeeze, as one of my coworkers would say.
Yeah.
And so Carver has a really great arc in season 3, because he starts out as all like Semper Fi about the whole thing. He's like, I am here to jack up children and take their drugs. That is what I'm here for. Yeah. Like there's a bit later on when Colvin gets the idea of the free zones, as he calls them, Hamsterdam. he goes to Carver and he says, "Get me the drug lieutenants. Get me the local drug lieutenants of all the different operations." And and Carver's like, "I don't know who any of these people are.
What are you talking about?"
Yeah, I think what is this? Like, he was like, I was just supposed to jack up people, not take a census.
Right.
And you could just see Carver, you could just see Colvin's face. It's like, everything about you is terrible.
Yeah, he starts to realize that Carver is just useless. About one thing. And it's good that he has the sit down with him to explain to him about what good policing is versus being a soldier, I think is what he says. He compares being
he has a line. I'll let you finish what you were saying, but he has a line. It's really important that I get this out. He was like, "Who are you going to talk to when the shit goes down? You don't know anybody. You don't know who these people are." Anybody. He's like, when it comes to being a supervisor, you know your stuff, but you are not policing. You're soldiering. Right. And go ahead. I'll let you say the next line.
And you said exactly what I was going to say. Like, this is something where Carver has to realize there's a lot more mental ability that goes into policing than just soldiering.
Right.
But what is if you know the rest of it off the top of your head, go ahead and say it. I certainly don't.
The problem with fighting a war is that it makes everyone your enemy.
Right.
And that is what's happened with Herc and Carver. Daniels makes a very similar point, I think, in season 4 or 5, where for decades they've allowed the police to become militarized. And because they're militarized, they're not police anymore. They're soldiers. What do soldiers do? Kill the enemy. I mean, that's a way big oversimplification. There are obviously soldiers who get to know the locals and do like social service work, for lack of a better phrase. But the bigger point that they're making, the more general point, is they have been taught and they have been raised in the Baltimore police in this era that the drug dealers, the people in the community, these children that are out there, they're the enemy. And they are treated as such, and they are not talked to. They are not gone to for any kind of information. And so there's this wall between the police and the locals. The locals don't want to talk to the police. They see the police as the enemy. They are an invading force, right. And then the police don't see the locals, as community members. They just see them as, I think Carver described it as like people, as combatants in occupied territory.
Right.
Colvin is about saving the Western District. He's about saving the community. And there's a tacit recognition, and this is why I've always been a proponent of drug decriminalization.
Sure.
I'm all for definitely some of the harder stuff for like prescription drug programs, prescription heroin, that sort of thing. And there's a whole other topic we can get into at a later date. But there are all kinds of harm reduction methods for dealing with the drug trade. And Colvin, at least on some level, recognizes that people are always going to want to do drugs. That's not going to change. I think Chris Rock said that you could take all the drugs off the planet. Somebody will invent something new. Like, he said it more funny than that. It was something about a baby's bottle, and that motherfucker will smoke it. But that's the point. People are in pain. Not everybody has the spoons, the equipment, the mental fortitude to deal with their pain, and so they mask it. They mask it with drugs and alcohol. That's just life. So rather than treat people who are sick, people who are in need, as enemy combatants, Colvin said, look, let's just get them away from the rest of the community that's worth saving and bring them to this area that is basically dead, which is hilarious when you think about it, because at the end of it, when this all comes to a head and they figured out what's happened, and you have Rawls going, this motherfucker, he's legalized drugs. Like, don't actually, his line is actually, don't you understand, you idiot? He's legalized drugs. He's like, I didn't legalize it. I just elected to not enforce it.
I just ignored it.
Right. That's some equivocating motherfucker right there. But at the end of it, the mayor has the entire vacant lot like bulldozed.
Oh yeah, there's nothing left. It's like Bubs' line is like, it's like they took a big eraser to it.
Yep.
One of the things that just kind of hit me as we were talking about this whole thing, what you mentioned, the militarization of the police. One when you look at the whole Hamsterdam thing, what was the one thing that brought it all down? The drug dealers and everything that, and the users, everything was kind of working there. I mean, every once in a while they'd have an issue, specifically a body showed up.
Murder that took
one
place.
murder showed up. But the person that decided to bring it all down was Herc. Herc hit a breaking point. And so it was really...
Though. I can't remember the guy that looks like Frankenstein in that group, but he was also ready to explode.
Yeah, he was pissed most of the time, but it was Herc that finally was like, fuck this. I think Carver asked him to help move the body in order to make sure that, there wasn't a light shown on this. And Herc's like, I'm not doing that. And then finally something broke with him. But the point I'm trying to make is that it was the police. Yeah. I think Herc and the rest, like Frankenstein, Herc and were just used to, and they love it. They loved, banging on these dealers and locking them up, putting the cuffs on them and going to war.
I am not here to talk badly about law enforcement.
Well, sure.
It's partially because I work with them, but also in part because not every law enforcement person is a bad person. But I think any position of authority, whether it be law enforcement or anything where you wield even a modicum of power, lends itself to bullying and bullies. I think people who have a need to exert power over others are definitely drawn to careers like that. Not everybody, obviously. And and people who are like that may end up in other places. So it's not a complete one-to-one. But I think Herc and that group is a really great example of the ones that are absolutely drawn to positions of power because they just have a need. They have their own trauma that they're dealing with, and they feel the need to express it by beating on children. Right. And that's what it is.
Unless there's a computer game involved, hey, let's get the kids on the Make-A-Face. Look what they're doing.
You got one that does asses? That's a great
that was a great line.
Oh, so good. I want to go back to Carver for 1 second, and I want to dovetail this right back to where we started with the Deacon, because you brought up how the entire system of dealing drugs breaks down. Once you don't need lookouts, once you don't need hoppers, once you don't need runners, all you have is the one guy who's got the drugs.
Yeah.
And he sells the drugs, he takes the money. Sells the drugs, takes the money. It's so funny because we talked about with season 2 the collapse of the working class. Once you have either shipped the jobs overseas or replaced everybody with a robot, your entire fucking local civilization breaks down.
Right.
Everybody that works in the warehouse or in the factory is now unemployed. All the people around them in the service industry, the people who work at gas stations, the people who work in restaurants, they're now out. No one's spending money in those places because they don't have any because they're out of a job. Now you've got kids going hungry, going to school, and the teachers are having to deal. You start to see once the major component that employs the people that keeps the whole thing running evaporates, just breaks down, disappears, it ripples out into the rest of the community.
Right.
And you see it with drug dealers, which is great. What a comparison. So once they're allowed to deal drugs, you have all of these kids that were caught up in this very organized system, just feral children, essentially, just roaming free.
Yeah.
And Carver, over the course of season 3, goes from military captain to police. He starts recognizing that this is happening, and he has a crisis of conscience, as it were, and he gets the drug dealers to pay out essentially unemployment.
Right.
He's like,
which, by the way, best and most accurate description of unemployment that I've ever heard on a TV show.
Well, you know what? You actually work at unemployment, so you want to quick say what you're talking about?
Well, a lot of people, even some of the higher government officials, think that you, as a worker, pay into unemployment. You don't. It is the employers that do. Employers pay into this insurance fund. And when you become unemployed, if you lost your job as to no fault of your own, you can get some assistance from that fund.
Right.
Every other time I've heard it described from anybody else on a show or whatever, it is always, I paid into that, you know, and granted, unemployment doesn't come up, especially the unemployment fund or whatever, doesn't come up too often, but I love to see that Carver understood it. I'm so glad.
It's good stuff. So first he makes the drug lieutenants that are down there pay out to the kids, and he uses to buy a basketball net. Which also leads to one of my favorite lines of season 3, where Cuddy, we need to talk about Cuddy. Cuddy from The Cut walks up to Carver and he says something about like the kids, and Carver sort of looks at him and is like, is that just like a drive-by fuck you, or are you actually going to help out here?
Right.
Curbside is what it was. Is this a curbside fuck you, or you're going to help? And Cuddy, leading into his big arc in seasons 4 and 5, takes on some of the drug kids to teach them how to box. And I want to clean up with Carver and the Deacon, and then we can dovetail back into Cuddy.
Sure.
But one of the things that happens towards the end of season 3 is, for a while there, it's just drug dealing. It's just sort of that antagonism between the cops and the drug dealers, and they would go back to it periodically. There's a great bit in the beginning where a handful of kids try it out to see if it's a trap or not, and nobody knows that they're there, so they're just like, we're gonna leave. There's no customers. Yeah. And they have to like run around with the paddy wagon and grab junkies off the street and be like, I hear that WMD is the bomb.
The old white man saying that. It was hilarious.
You know who he was, right? That's what's his nuts from season 1.
Yeah, I recognized him. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, he got bumped back to the road to a beat cop at a homicide.
At the
end of season 1, and we don't really see him in season 2, and then he pops up here driving the paddy wagon, and he has a great line too, where he's just like, this is the best gig I ever had.
He loves it. He absolutely loves what he's doing, and
you
that
call,
influences, I think, what happens at the end here.
Yes. So anyway, they had to go grab a bunch of drug dealers and like direct them to the drug dealers, and they're like, there they are, just hawking their drugs just as loud as can be. But what the Deacon figures out, and what starts to happen, is it's like, we've never had every single problem in this city concentrated in one area. Just one.
Right.
Sorry. Something just... What the hell is that? To ask her what that... Oh, okay.
Momentarily distracted.
Yeah, I got it. Sorry. So anywho... they're like, we have every problem we have in the city is concentrated into these 3 areas. And this is talking about like needle exchanges, condom depots, like every social ailment, right, is right there to deal with. And so like social workers converge on the place.
Right. You want to try to make an impact to actually curb these problems. Here you go. Here they all are in one little spot.
That's the brilliance of it, because on the one hand, it was done as a crime measurement. It was essentially, let's get all the drug dealers here. Let's get all the drug addicts here. They'll leave. They'll leave. It was about getting the drug dealers off the corners around the neighborhood and just focusing them in one area. And when that happens, you see, over the course of the season, you see people like painting their stoops. You see people sweeping. You see what looks like a community again. Oof, we got to talk about Bunk and Omar, by the way. But you start to see the community come back to life, at least briefly. And so Colvin doesn't even realize what he's done, because he was just about lowering the murder rate and making some safe areas of the city. He doesn't even realize what he did was provide a place for easy access to the most vulnerable people in the city, to have reach out, to have, social workers come in and work with them. And it all comes down because the mayor gets a visit by the federal government that basically says, this is now 20 years ago, okay? Right. The Wire season 3 debuted in
2004.
2004. We're better now than we were 20 years ago, but we're still not. You still say drug decriminalization to people, and everyone gets the willies.
Oh yeah,
there's definitely still resistance to this. It's better. Harm reduction has taken some degree of root, but not a lot. And at that time, they're standing over the mayor basically like, and we will cut all your funding ever from the federal government. You will get nothing. Good day, sir.
$500 million.
Yeah, because there is I mean, when you like Colvin has like a stack of letters from the community going, "Thank you for this." Like, it's one of those deals where, and this will be the last thing I say, and then we'll move on. It's one of those deals where they realize they've got a great thing going here, but it's scary because for 100 years, drug addicts were the enemy.
Right.
You think about, not to go off on a tangent about the history of drug laws, but I think it's the Harrison Narcotic Act that criminalized opiates, was done on behalf of like white women post Civil War who got addicted to morphine. The marijuana laws were very much targeted against Mexicans and blacks, specifically blacks in the jazz movement. The history of drug criminalization and drug laws has a lot, not everything, but a lot to do with persecution of various minorities. And also, if you ever wanted to get, middle-class white people to vote for you, make crime your issue. How do you make crime your issue? Attack the drug dealers. And then what starts to happen is you have a military that doesn't have an enemy, but they've got all this equipment. They got to do something with it.
Right.
That's why you have police forces with fucking Humvees.
Yeah.
Like, you ever see some of the documentary footage, especially from like when, the NWA, not the National Wrestling Alliance, the other one, the other NWA would or Ice-T or something would like talk about Crenshaw and Compton and all of that. And you see fucking military vehicles with battering rams, but painted police.
Oh my god!
They got that shit from the military. So it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle of first persecution and then militarization, and that's how you end up with guys like Herc, who at the end, and this is what I wanted to say to end this bit, who at the end doesn't know any better. That's all he's ever known, and who's to blame him? He grew up in a world where drug dealers were the enemy. He became a cop and was reinforced that drug dealers are the enemy. And then he is promoted and given raises by going after he did a good job. When you turn that on its head, and from the federal government on down, you have people going, this is not the way we do business. Yeah. This is not how things are done. We don't decriminalize drugs. We don't legalize drugs. We don't try to treat drug dealers. We imprison them. We beat on them. That's how things are done. And then, somebody tries to say, but what if there's another way? And they're like, nope, we're not hearing that shit.
Right.
Not for the last 100 years. We're not starting now. It is hard to make change. Reform, Lamar. Reform.
Yes, indeed. Slow train coming.